The term games as a service, or GaaS, has only become popular in recent years, but the concept stretches back decades. The beta for Habitat launched in 1986, a subscription-based social MMO for the Commodore 64. GaaS has been losing money for as long as it's been making it. It feels like every other week we're hearing about a live service shutting down or getting cancelled a month after being announced. To be fair, that one was because in the budget, Sega forgot to factor in the Yuji Naka bail fund. Maybe they could have finished the game with all the Yakuza money they don't have. Sometimes, though, the player base loves a game more than the market does, and by their power, it will rise from the grave. Check out the first video I did on this topic from a year or two ago, but to quickly recap, if you want to bring an MMO back from the dead, you're going to need the world and all the assets along with the actual functions. The first part isn't that hard, you'll be downloading those anyway to your computer when you install the game. The code is a different story. Essentially, while the game is still alive, the community needs to collect tons and tons of data on incoming and outgoing messages between your computer and the game's server. That doesn't contain any actual code, just an idea of what points to what and clues as to how things interact. Then, fans need to rewrite the game from the ground up, writing their own code to replicate the behaviors of everything in the game as accurately as possible. It takes an enormous amount of effort and can only happen with the collaboration of skilled programmers and those with the deepest knowledge of the game. Last time we looked at 3 MMOs from the early 2000s, games released around the time of World of Warcraft. Today, our subjects all came out a few years later, 2007 and beyond, meaning that they had some time to take in the success of WoW and respond accordingly before they hit the market. Think of this as the next generation of MMOs, and the first among them is a game with a lot of flowers at its gravestone. World of Warcraft was ground out over the course of 5 years, starting development in 1999. That game was an industry-shaping success, but that doesn't mean that everyone who worked on it was happy. In fact, just a year after it came out, 40 developers left Blizzard to form Carbine Studios and start work on an MMO their way. Among these were executive producer Jeremy Gaffney, who said in a Reddit AMA that the team's motto was, "We just crunched for 6 years, we want to do anything but WoW." To this end, in 2005, they would start work on their own proprietary engine, simply called Engine, because they wanted something tailor-made for what they were doing, and something that would scale graphically for at least 5 years, already anticipating a long development cycle. And a long cycle it would be. It appears they started to run out of initial investment after 2 years, because they would be acquired by NCSoft in 2007. That's never a good sign. Still, the game wouldn't even be announced for another 4 years in 2011. It was dubbed WildStar, a forward-thinking action MMO set in a bright and poppy sci-fi world, the stage for a clash between the expansionist Dominion Empire and a ragtag society of refugees and rebels known as the Exiles. It would feature a number of systems it called momentum mechanics, which let players interact with the world in dynamic, almost sandbox ways. You're on a mission to kill alien jungle cats. You see one that's irradiated and start scanning it. Or it's too tough, so you scare some prey away from you into the cats, and they start attacking the prey. And then you jump in when everyone is weakened. They're tough, so you see a huntress and drag them to her to get her cheering on for rep. You see a second huntress, and now you're bouncing between them for double rep rewards. Some of that is a little confusing and unclear, but there's an obvious intent to create what they called layered content. In that Reddit AMA, Gaffney said the focus of the game was, quote, "let you play the way you want to play," unquote. This was implemented via the game's 4 paths, which represented different playstyles loosely based on the Bartle player types. Each path would have access to unique mission types along with exclusive abilities. Explorer is for, well, explorers, Scientist is for completionists, Settler is for social players, and Soldier is for PvE and PvP enjoyers. After what I can only imagine was a grueling 9 years in development, WildStar released to mostly positive reviews. Critics praised the involved feeling of the action combat and the game's polished systems and wealth of features such as player housing. Many of Gaffney's promises failed to pay off, however, and the game was beset with issues that stunted its post-launch growth and drove away much of the existing audience. See, all that talk about a game for everyone never really manifested, although it tried. WildStar, at its core, is an action MMO. It wears the skin of one too proudly to be anything else, what with handing you PvE content out of the gate and a row of ability slots. Every class is designed around fitting into the combat trinity, one way or another, and the paths functioned more like little bonuses to certain playstyles rather than something that shaped your experience. None of these are necessarily bad things. As long as what's there is good, everything should be fine, right? A common critique of WildStar was that it was unfocused. They weren't lying to you about the crazy variety of stuff in the game, they just weren't able to build all of that up to even standards. So the player base was left to crowd around the one thing that was the most fleshed out, the PvE rating. The combat in the game was highly praised, so that doesn't sound like bad news until players made it through the reportedly boring and very easy leveling phase to meet a crushingly difficult endgame rating experience. Most MMOs will make sure that the endgame PvE content covers a variety of skill levels, as key story content is often contained therein, so you should at least offer an easy mode for people who just want to see the cutscenes. In those games, you can earn a bachelor's in rating and find a job just fine. In WildStar, you're gonna sit your ass down and get that PhD, and maybe then you can come home for Thanksgiving. This difficulty spike turned a lot of players off, and it meant that the most fleshed out content in the game was only really enjoyable by the smallest niche there was. WildStar did not have a price tag, rather only a subscription, meaning that it needed long-term investment from users to see any profit. It did not get that. The game would begin hemorrhaging players, and in just a year's time, NCSoft announced that it would be switching up their business model from a pure subscription to free-to-play with microtransactions. Things would only get worse as 2016 rolled around, when dedicated PvP servers were shut down and merged with others. This coincided with large layoffs at the company. In 2018, Carbine announced plans to shut the game down, and was dead by the end of the year. Damn. There's been a few attempts over the years to explain why WildStar did so poorly, and fans have come up with some major points. Boring leveling that turned off casuals, an endgame limited only to, as one Redditor put it, cat-ass rating. Said rating or attunement raids required a ludicrous amount of time and quest lines to even access, and confused marketing with a mass appeal art style but hardcore sensibilities. Funny enough, NCSoft, the EA of MMOs, didn't really have anything to do with the game's closure. There's a fascinating video called Why I Left Carbine's WildStar by former gameplay design lead Timothy Kane that goes in depth on the behind-the-scenes troubles at the studio.
It had been 3 years. There was still no setting, no story, no classes. The head office was really upset. They sent out a new studio head. The studio head asked a lot of hard questions. There were a bunch of starts and stops in lots of different directions. Decided unilaterally to fire every designer, except one. I said, you know what? I love being programming director, but I've got a really good person to replace me in there. I'll do it. That's when the studio head said, oh, you have 90 days to create a setting and classes, and we're going to have a meeting. With their help, we made 9 new classes. We had a setting outline. The home office liked what they saw and said, this is good. Keep going.
The next 15 or so minutes are spent describing excruciating in-office politics between departments that cause needless problems during development. I will spare you.
Carbine was the biggest example to me of, without a singular vision that everyone, directors and everyone at the company, buys into, it will lead to ruin. No amount of money, no amount of time will make up for the fact that if you don't have a very clear vision, you are not going to succeed. I tried being that vision person. I was prevented. I tried supporting others, one of the others being a vision person. That didn't work. So I just had to remove myself from that. I also learned that no amount of pay, no amount of money is worth that much stress.
WildStar leaves a complicated memory in the minds of many. For some, it was a misfire on all fronts, cursed by the ambitions of its creators. For others, it was a unique experience that should have been polished to a shine, and it's these fans who have been working steadily on an emulator for WildStar. Nexus Forever. To boot, it's not really fair to view Nexus Forever as any of the other games I'll be talking about in this video or the last one, because it isn't finished. You have to manually put in a server to connect to. I don't know of any servers at the moment, and I couldn't really find any from a quick glance through their Discord, so I'll be playing in a private solo experience, just to check it out. Right from the get-go, the music in WildStar is pretty great, if not a little generic. It's a high-spirited adventure orchestra. Much like WoW and other similar MMOs, WildStar asks you to select between 2 factions, the Dominion and the Exiles, each with their own selection of races. Races tend to run the gamut of basically human, if not human, all the way to animal people and demons and robots, and the Dominion looks way cooler, I'm not gonna lie. One neat touch is that the small fluffy animal race, the Chua, don't change when you switch between male and female. This is because, in the lore, they aren't sexually dimorphic. They do have 2 sexes, but they are basically indistinguishable, which I find neat. A lot of sci-fi games tend to box the weird aliens into still having 2 genders. Somehow the gender-neutral race is not the robots, though. The men are big and burly, and the women have some epic child-birthing hips. I'm playing as a robot, because robots are awesome, and that limits the classes I can choose from. A little disappointing. I prefer games that don't limit you as much based on your race. That sounds weird to say out loud. Check out some of the max-level armor sets for the different classes. This stuff looks awesome. With such varied body types, character creation gives you a lot of race-specific options, like which sort of hair crystal I want for my robot lady. It does feel limiting in some ways, but you can make something cool looking. The opening is pretty nice, setting up the planet of Nexus and the journey you're about to set upon. Please forgive the very top and bottom of the screen being cut off. I didn't notice it until I was done recording all the footage for this video. I'm sorry. Immediately, I'm hit with a wall of free-to-play junk, daily reward tracks, events, that stuff, and I have to click out. This isn't specific to this game, but I really wish games with this stuff would at least hold off on shoving it in your face until you've at least cleared a tutorial. Right off the bat, I have to commend the devs for the way the game plays. Running around, jumping, double jumping, and attacking all feel really smooth. Movement is snappy and precise, abilities don't lock you down, and sprinting is available immediately. Even the basic attacks are satisfying, with flashy animations, particle effects, and sound. Pretty much every move from you or an enemy has a visible hitbox as it charges up, meaning that there can be a lot of variety in the attack patterns of mobs. The controls do need a little tweaking to tap the potential of this stuff, though. By default, left and right rotate the camera, which I can't stand, and mouse look is not the default. I find that my favorite way to play MMOs, and games with similar interfaces, is being able to freely swap between mouse look and free mouse, and unfortunately, that doesn't really work here. If you want a mouse look by default, you have to open up a window like your inventory to free the mouse up. I'm playing as a stalker, the close-range assassin class, so I have a lot of ways to slash and dash. Once I'm acquainted with the combat, I start running into my first issue, and it's not WildStar's fault. Nexus Forever is far from finished. Case in point, the first optional quest you get is to light these flares around camp, except when you light one, all of them get flipped to the on state, but they don't count towards the quest, so it's impossible to complete. Stuff like this happens all the time, all over the place. At a certain point, after doing a few missions for the NPCs available to me, I think a flag just failed to trigger and I had nothing to do except run around. That's not too bad, as WildStar's world is bursting with charm. I think the art style has aged fantastically, and if it came out today, I wouldn't bat an eye. Everything is lush, colorful, and bouncy. Just look at my character's body when she jumps. What is that? Is she made of jello or something? Eventually, I realize that I can go to a different zone, the Crimson Isle, and this one is much more complete. I'm actually able to finish an entire quest line, plus some side missions, although it's not without its hiccups. When old players complain about the leveling experience being boring, I can see what they mean. There's a decent amount of variety in terms of the flavor of each quest, but it usually comes down to interact with a certain number of things or kill a certain number of things. The combat's good, so it wouldn't be that bad if this game didn't have a love affair with backtracking. You have a radio that you can call quest NPCs with in between objectives, but for some reason you will arbitrarily be forced to walk all the way back to them to start the next leg of the quest line, and it slows the pacing down tremendously. I don't know why it's there. Then I level up.
Oh, now things are gonna get real!
So this game has a weird tone thing going on. It was marketed with this kind of, yeah, badass. Do you remember when Game of Thrones came out and you couldn't get the fuck away from the word badass? I'm really glad we're over that. That really fucks my throat. Despite this, no one in the game acts like that, so you're playing through a pretty straight-faced adventure world. Then a disembodied voice descends from the heavens to remind you that it's from 2014. It evokes Battleborn.
Oh snap! That was f***ing awesome!
I wrap up everything in this zone and get dumped into the wide open world. I wanted to play a bit further, maybe to level 10, until I hit a point where I had 4 different quests, and all of them were impossible to complete because they didn't function properly. So I called it a day. This is a complicated question, as Nexus Forever is clearly unfinished. I don't want to make the game look bad, because that's not really the game. I also don't want this to reflect poorly on the developers. These things are hard, and they're working for free. So I'll separate my opinions on WildStar from Nexus Forever. WildStar has a lot of potential. There's a great foundation here, and the original devs knew how to make a game feel good. I can't say anything about the end game, but the leveling experience leaves some to be desired. There's a lot of unnecessary backtracking, and the way it tells stories is strangely limited. A lot of MMOs opt for big walls of text, which isn't great. There's also small in-engine cutscenes, which are better. WildStar chooses to present its quests in the form of tiny little text boxes. It left me a little confused as to what was actually important or worth paying attention to. because nothing really feels that way. I struggle to see how any big, epic tale could be told in this format. Still, the world is appealing, and that's a key factor in an MMO for me. These are games which ask you to invest yourself in their world, and if I can enjoy just running around and sightseeing, I think you did a good job. Nexus Forever is a very valiant effort so far, and I applaud the contributors to the project, even if progress is slow. Unless you have a burning curiosity to go check this game out, I wouldn't go through the roundabout process of getting this thing up and running. That being said, if this game seems cool to you, definitely earmark this project and check back every so often. Without the pressure of imminent closure or a subscription weighing on your bank account every month, this could be a fun game to pop in every once in a while when it's more of a whole product. You've probably never heard of Hellgate London, but when it was first announced in the mid-2000s, it garnered a lot of buzz. Much like WildStar, Hellgate was being headed up by a gaggle of former Blizzard devs. Not from WoW, but Diablo. Brothers Max and Eric Schaefer, along with David Brevik and Bill Roper, all left Blizzard after serving as either project leads or producers on Diablo 2. They got together and hatched an idea to make an MMO with first-person shooter elements. We wanted to make an MMO world where you could play it like you were playing Counter-Strike or any FPS. Thus, Flagship Studios and Hellgate London were born. This led to a media firestorm, as the Diablo guys are making that, but first-person and guns is a good sell. Unfortunately, this vision wasn't to be. WoW had already released, and investors weren't interested in small-scale, stable MMOs with focused concepts. They wanted the biggestest thing ever. This meant that the FPS concept was slowly phased out, and the game would be made closer to Diablo, despite that not being the original goal. It's just easier to slap on the box. Development was proceeding smoothly for the most part, although there were hurdles. Network management and engineering was handed over to Bandai Namco early on, so the team didn't have to worry about that end. Instead, they focused their efforts on the game's random generation. Much like Diablo, items, bosses, mob placements, and the layouts of whole levels were randomly generated. They were already seasoned pros in this area, so making an algorithm to throw together a cohesive level wasn't that hard. However, unlike Diablo, the demand for assets was much greater. The new third-person close-up camera angle meant the environments had to be much more detailed compared to Diablo 2, which looked like this. An entirely new rendering engine was created for these levels, and the load was made heavier by all of the cutting-edge features they worked into it, which had to be accounted for when making assets. Asset production became the yoke around the neck of Hellgate. The game needed an ocean of unique textures, segments, models, etc. to keep it from getting repetitive, and that stuff took time. Quote, "It permeated everything. It reduced our iteration on a lot of things. It reduced the amount of time we had to polish at the end. Ideally, we would have had another 6 months, another 8 months, or even another year just to polish what we had and make it slicker. We'd have made the opening sequences a little bit better and gone over the quests. So much of what makes a great game is what you do after it looks like it's done. It's those last bits of polish and that last go-around. At Blizzard, we had unlimited time and budget, and Blizzard's always taken advantage of that and will never release anything before it's perfect. We simply didn't have that luxury." One reason they lacked that luxury was because of a nasty surprise. Midway through development, Bandai Namco pulled out of the deal for undisclosed reasons. Max Schaefer has said that he understands why they did it and doesn't feel wronged, but this would be a major blow to development. Suddenly, Flagship had to take on an entire domain of online gaming when they were already up to their necks in work. In the end, they signed deals with a few different companies to host their servers in North America, Europe, and Asia. This is a good time to bring up Flagship's unusual financial model. See, Hellgate did not have a traditional publisher. Bamco was signed on to handle networking and was ostensibly the publisher, but after their departure, Flagship didn't seek another one. Instead, they decided to avoid being beholden to publisher money and took a route I've never seen before. Hellgate London found an investor in Comerica Bank, with the game itself being used as collateral. This was apparently inspired by the model used for independent film production. I have never heard of another game doing this since, and perhaps that's for good reason. The development was so frantic that the game's final story content wasn't even added until days or weeks before release. It's not surprising that Hellgate had a very rocky launch, with lots of polish issues across the board. The game's premiere in Asia was especially disastrous, with server problems so rampant that an emergency patch had to be developed. Unfortunately, for some arcane reason, the way the game was coded, the only way to apply the patch was to wipe every character on the server. The announcement of this came 3 days before the patch itself hit, annihilating every player's progress a month after release. Brutal. The game was also criticized for having a confusing business model. See, there were technically 3 components, all priced sorta differently. The game was buy to play, giving you access to an offline solo experience as well as a free-to-play online one. The game then offered a premium subscription for additional online content. Schafer regrets this. We had a pretty jumbled and confusing economic model, having single-player multiplayer that's free and premium multiplayer content for subscriptions. It's just too much, and every group felt like the other group was getting the better deal. Hellgate London released to mixed reviews, receiving both praise and criticism for its combat from different types of players, although the world and aesthetics were universally liked. This was not enough to save it, however, and the compounding issues of development, the heavy costs, bad business model, and launch issues ultimately sank the game in less than a year. The game's intellectual property was thus seized by Comerica Bank. Wow, what a deal. Servers were kept alive even after Flagship's closure, and the game was eventually sold to Korean distributor Hanbitsoft, who relaunched the game as a single-player only experience. It is still available on Steam to this day, a lonely remainder of a promising game that was screwed out of the gate. That potential would be treasured by a small team who have worked tirelessly to resurrect it into London 2038. London 2038 is a bit tricky to get set up, requiring a retail copy of the original game. I don't know if the community-made launcher works with the Steam version, and I'm not going to spend $13 to find out. Thus, I had to get it via means. It was kind of a headache. I had to activate it with a product key that was found in the manual. I accidentally changed my wallpaper to the cover of the manual. It takes a minute. I'm going to start off by riffing on the opening. An 8-minute cinematic. They really want you to buy into their world. A near-future version of London, besieged by demons, a battleground between the forces of hell and sci-fi techno Knight Templars, which, to be fair, is awesome. A narrator fills us in on some lore about hell and darkness spreading to Earth and invading it. Then we get this scene in a car with a little girl, her knight grandpa, and a very 7th gen looking woman, right? Like, the hair, the face, she's in power armor but with an exposed midriff and visible thong. After the car gets crashed by some demons, another lady appears and of course she got the yiddies out. The voice acting isn't terrible. I don't know how to describe it. It's just good enough to count as professional.
What you're doing is senseless. It's suicide.
We Templar have to assault the Hellgate, no matter the odds. It's the only way the refugees can safely go into hiding. You have to protect her. She has a greater destiny.
No!
Temple Church is just beyond the building complex.
You can't go!
This little girl character everyone's trying to protect has this uncanny look to her. She has the body and proportions of a child, but her face it's like an old woman's. It's so strange. 7th gen power armor thong lady blows herself up to save the girl, and now she's all grown up and a leader of the Cyber Templars. She also refuses to put her hair up when she wears a full helmet, for some reason. Character creation is dead simple, disappointingly so, and with an interface that leaves a lot to be desired. You're limited to preset face, hair, and facial hairstyles with color customizing and some very general height and bulk sliders. There is no visual preview of any of the presets, they aren't even numbered, you just click through them. Hellgate offers 6 pretty standard classes: tank, melee DPS, pet summoner, magical debuff / DPS, physical DPS, and engineer, which is like a gun / pet class. I chose Blade Master on a whim and am dumped into the tutorial. You just start out in an alley with no context for who you are or why you're there. Max Schaefer admits as much, but this is not a good tutorial. The actual informative text pops up for 1 second before fading away. As soon as I saw that, I was thinking, that's totally the quest update pop-up that they repurposed for tutorial text, and yep, it totally is. The schedule was so tight, they couldn't even develop a unique asset for tutorial messages. This section walks you through some rudimentary things: attacking, inventory, jumping. It actually teaches you how to jump before it teaches you how to walk, because it never teaches you how to walk. It also has an inappropriate feeling conversational tone to it. There are messages with or sarcastic references to a wounded character as the dying fellow. When it's telling you about icons for different kinds of NPCs, it says they might represent medics or vendors or space donkeys, whatever. Okay, usually when a game's tutorial has this much personality, it's because there's a character in universe who's kind of breaking the fourth wall to teach you about game mechanics. There is a character who could be the one speaking, this murmur guy, but it's not him. It's a disembodied third-person narrator. If that's not the case, the other situation is that the game itself just has a lighthearted tone. Except Hellgate just made me sit through a very self-serious 8-minute cinematic. I'm standing in the ruins of a city, and the game is making LOL XD random jokes. Like, who's talking to me? Is that God? I've spent a lot of time complaining about the opening of this game, and I'll admit, it doesn't really wow, which is kind of a shame because I think the game itself is actually pretty cool. Hellgate London can best be described as a proto-Path of Exile. You play through randomly generated, instanced areas, partaking in tried-and-true hack-and-slash action, collecting loot, identifying it, leveling up, getting new skills, improving your equipment, and returning to small, multiplayer hub areas where you can buy and sell stuff and accept quests.
Something I can do for you? Okay, goodbye.
My first impression of the combat was that it was a tiny bit stiff, mostly owing to the fact that you're stuck in place as you attack for the most part. But once I understood that, it's solid. With my limited number of moves, I was able to pull a bunch of enemies and cut them to pieces with just a few levels under my belt, and when you're done, you get to see all the treasure that burst out of them. Then you identify a few, organize the stuff you want to sell later, equip a better item, and continue adventuring. There's a simple joy to the Diablo-style gameplay loop that might not be for everyone, but it works for me. Once you get past the undercooked first 15 or so minutes, the real meat of this game is a blast. It's not fair to compare it to other traditional MMORPGs, which is why I bring up Diablo and PoE as references. See, those former games have a much larger scope and need to appeal to lots of different kinds of players to support their worlds. Hellgate is laser focused on doing one thing very well and providing that to a niche audience. That means there's just gonna be less variety. It's not to say the world isn't compelling, because it certainly is. I'm not so much a fantasy guy, I've always been more into sci-fi settings or contemporary ones with fantasy elements, so this hits the rule of cool sweet spot. London is a perfect setting. Its architecture is over 100 years old, but it has modern cement and streets. Mix that in with the demons and the techno night stuff, and there's an exciting blend of old, new, magic, and technology, and everything feels congruous with each other. I had a great time with Hellgate London, but it's definitely in its own category. Reading up on the behind the scenes and what this game was and wanted to be is fascinating. Of course, it predates Path of Exile, but that original concept of an MMO FPS would later be realized somewhat in PlanetSide. And if you want to expand that out even further to be closer to what Hellgate eventually became, I mean, Warframe and Destiny would release a few years later. They were definitely onto something. It's just a shame it turned out the way it did. If WildStar was raised wrong by its parents, Hellgate London was born with fetal alcohol syndrome. It was just screwed right out the gate. The core of the game is good, but that and the lackluster business model wasn't enough to offset the heavy tolls of its development and a terrible launch. Maybe if those surprises weren't as fatal, Flagship could have toughed it out a few years and shaped up a better model and improved the game for a niche audience. Alas, it was not to be. Looking back, I think we would have done away with the free service, because what we really wanted to do, and what we never got a chance to do, was to build the universe. One of our regrets with the Diablo series was that it was kinda fire and forget. We did one expansion, but that was it. We missed out on an opportunity to grow the game and grow the universe as much as we wanted. So with Hellgate, we didn't want to do that. We wanted it to be something we'd grow over time. For instance, we wanted to leave London and visit major cities throughout the world. If you're a fan of PoE and this sounds cool to you, plus you're willing to put in some elbow grease to get a copy, I would recommend checking it out. When I was on London 2038, I actually saw other people in the hubs, and there was a decent amount of chatter on the server, so it's still got a player base. We're going to end off on a lighter one because, to be honest, there's not a lot to this story. Following the release and success of Toontown Online, which deserves its own coverage in this series, Disney wanted to expand its gaming presence in this exciting and profitable MMO landscape. To that end, development began on a similar game using the same engine, but set in the world of their blockbusting Pirates of the Caribbean film franchise. This was probably around 2004 or 5 as the game was announced in the latter year and slated to release in 2006 to tie in with the second movie, Dead Man's Chest. For reasons that probably relate to the fact that making an MMO is hard, the game was pushed back to 2007 and launched to mixed reviews. It boasted a swashbuckling world complete with all the recognizable characters from the franchise, or at least the first 2 movies. There was combat, sailing, and the whole Caribbean to explore, kinda. It's not a huge budget project, what can you expect? Much like Toontown, Potco offered a freemium business model, allowing anyone to play, but giving extra content and rewards to paying members. In 2013, they announced the closure of the game, giving everyone membership bonuses for a few months until shut down as a little thank you to its player base. You might be asking, what happened? And unlike the previous 2 examples, the reasons are much less exciting and much more Disney. Pirates Online was made primarily for children, and unlike sweaty Mamorpagers, kids don't care about endgame content, PvP balancing, or any of that crap. They want to play the pirate game because pirates are cool and they like the movies. Instead of any real flaw with the game itself, Pirates Online was doomed by the conditions of its birth. A lot of birth analogies today. By 2013, the Toontown engine, Panda 3D, was really starting to show its age, and Disney had recently acquired the massively successful Club Penguin, which I think they considered to be easier and cheaper to scale up. The end of Pirates Online coincides closely with the end of Toontown, and foreshadows Disney's switch in focus to new gaming ventures like Club Penguin and Disney Infinity, both of which they would run into the ground within a few years. Awesome. I hope it was worth it. Luckily for pirate enjoyers, the game would be resurrected just 2 years later as The Legend of Pirates Online. The game opens with a first-person shot of your character waking up to Jack Sparrow in prison. It's genuinely a pretty good character model, and you get a nice shot of the facial animations before heading into character creation. It's better than Hellgate. I'm amused by the general shape selection, which is more just a starting point. Still, the options on hand aren't that interesting. Pressing random over and over will not get you anything that looks wildly different. Jack Sparrow talks to you as you work, and it's kind of charming.
There's no shame in eating well, mate.
There are individual sliders for things like face and body, but you also have presets to click through. Whoa! Whoa! No way!
Knew a girl once. Looked just like you. Quite pretty. When the lights were dim.
Jack, who the fuck have you been hanging out with? Yeah, let's just boost that cranium up real quick. And name selection. If you want a custom name, you need to submit it for approval first, and I doubt the mods of this server will accept a character called Blackface Megamind, so, close enough.
An honor to meet you, truly. And now, it's time to make our sortie. As in exit. As in leave. As in now. Works every time. That's not thunder, mate. If I were you, I'd fetch my personal effects and get out of range of those cannons.
Very soon, we meet Orlando Bloom and set off on a boat to escape the prison island. Things don't go as planned, however, as we're boarded by the villain of the game, Jolly Roger, in another admittedly nice-looking cutscene. I have to say, this game, while looking pretty rough in many places, has a clear care for its presentation. Lots of the more important quest lines have in-engine cutscenes with full voice acting, dynamic camera angles, decent lip syncing, and much better facial animations than you'd expect. I get the impression that a lot of talented people worked on this. They were just limited by time, budget, and technology.
Looks like the price of loyalty just went up, eh? What? Can't take a joke?
Oh my god, he just killed that guy in cold blood. In a family MMO.
Just make sure Jack Sparrow knows I'm coming for him. Said I'll be letting you live. The sharks may not be so charitable. What are you waiting for? Satan!
With that, we escape to Port Royal and begin our journey. Pirates of the Caribbean Online is a pretty standard adventure MMO with a realistic scope. There are no classes. Instead, you have a small assortment of weapon types to equip, and they each have their own skill trees that level up as you do the thing. This is in addition to other skills like sailing, which advance in the same way. One thing I really like is the uniqueness of the weapons. Swords have a basic swing and an additional follow-up, but if you time your follow-up, you get bonus damage. Going by the wiki, each sword type eventually gets a 5-part combo, and the heaviest sword swings the slowest, meaning that the timing requires you to delay your click the longest and is thus most at risk of dropping. This is offset by the fact that it does the most damage. The fighting game player in me loves this concept, tying more rewarding options to higher execution while other MMO stuff is going on like buffs, debuffs, and cooldowns. It's so rad. And I doubt that the timing on that stuff is like Sako combo level hard. Guns are the second weapon you get, and they have to be manually aimed and loaded with different ammo for different effects. This falls in line with the design of the swords, leaning into more action-oriented combat, but it's certainly simpler. After completing a few quests where you straight up kill a guy, I talked to Kira Knightley.
Ah, so you're Jack Sparrow's newest protege, hmm?
Well, it's not really her, it's Eliza Schneider from Food Fight, and Orlando Bloom is actually Winston? My next task is to get a ship, but I decide to do a side quest first, out of curiosity. The questing in this game is not good. It is the driest, most stereotypical MMO quests you can imagine. It is what people who hate the genre imagine they're like. Go here, kill 5 things, backtrack to me, go somewhere else, kill another 5 things, backtrack to me. Rinse and repeat, and it's not limited to side quests either. I board my ship, the most fearsome barge in the 7 seas, the Old Kitten, and sail for Devil's Anvil to get my gun from Captain Barbossa. Sailing is fine. I'm not a video game sailing enthusiast, so I can't say how it stacks up to Wind Waker or Ass Creed 4 Black Face. Oh, whoops, that's this game. What I can say is that islands aren't spread so far apart that getting ping-ponged around them is as bad as, like, Star Wars Galaxies was. It's at this point that I start to think that maybe the developers weren't sending up minstrelsy and the game isn't loading textures properly. Because Barbossa likes to hang out in a black void, apparently.
This here's a dark place.
You have never been more right. I think it's charming how Barbossa has to stress to the player not to shoot people with their gun. It feels like it's written in specifically for the parent playing this game with their kid.
There'll be no use of unnecessary force. No shooting of the pirates, or even Navy swine for that matter. Cheat them, steal from them, plunder their ships, yes. But no guns.
Anyway, shoot this damn monkey. I fixed the texture issue by unchecking an option called compressed textures. Now I guess they can breathe, good for them. To my utter disappointment, I was not in blackface. I was in fact a white lady. Don't clip that, don't take that out of the context. The world of Pirates Online is constantly struggling against its art style. Despite its clear upgrades in a few areas like lighting, Toontown, a game released 4 years earlier, still looks much smoother. It's not really Pirates' fault, it kinda has to go for a more photoreal look, but Toontown's soft shapes and simple textures hold up leagues better. Pirates just looks crunchy a lot of the time. It's especially apparent when comparing the regular NPCs to the movie characters. The latter are beautifully captured and have a ton of articulation and detailed texture work, and the shopkeepers look like they're made of paper. I stopped by a potion brewing shop and assumed it would just be a regular store, but no, it's a whole Puyo Puyo minigame with this crazy island trance music? I just sat and played this for a while. It was like digital ayahuasca. I go to a tavern to meet an important character, then decide to get in on the game of Hold'em poker that some locals are playing. I sit down, get my cards, and remember that I don't know how to play poker. Bet 8? Check? Oh shit, I'm a natural. I should go do this on, like, the stock market or something. Funny enough, the higher your gambling skill, the better you are at cheating, which, there's a message in there somewhere. Earlier, I met Tia Dalma, and she promised she would show me the ways of the hoodoo, and now that I'm a high enough level, I can go find her. But she's not on Tortuga anymore. I gotta go to Cuba. God's chosen people. Doing her quest will unlock the voodoo doll weapon, which sounds interesting. Unfortunately, the first thing I need to do is collect 3 bundles of straw and 3 bundles of pitch. Now, do I find those by foraging or buying them? No. I have to go out and sink some goddamn ships. This is the game's first real introduction to naval combat, and it is slow. I spent the better part of 20 minutes circling around trying to find the specific ship type and then sluggishly engaging them. You can shoot your left or right side cannons, but the game has realistic immersive physics, so it sort of shoots from the back. You gotta angle it. This sucked, and I was really at the end of my rope. It was 20 minutes, but it felt like 30, and when it was finally done, I took it back to Tia Dalma, and she says I have to go to a different island to kill at least 10 crabs, and I just tapped out. Sorry, but the questing in this game is a drag. For my generation, these were our childhood MMOs. I played Toontown, and my girlfriend played Pirates Online. The drive by fans to create legacy servers for these games isn't just preservation, it's also nostalgia, which is why a relatively unimpressive game like Pirates Online can have a community that's been going for 9 years. That's longer than the original. Sure, you can go check it out. It's easily the most accessible game of the 3 in this video. You just download it all as one package and it's ready to go. I picked this game to cover because of how dedicated the community is. They've even been updating the game. One of the most recent ones added in an island that was previously used for testing and wasn't available in the regular release. That's so cool. Pirates Online was a game that ran for a couple years and was discarded by a corporation to focus on other games, which it discarded to focus on other games. That's because Disney is not a video game company. They are not an entertainment company. They are an advertising and merchandising company that happens to be in the business of art. And yet, the players of their game loved it so much that they would work tirelessly to bring it back. And that's what I find so interesting about these cases. I would define art as a non-living thing shaped into one. It has the dreams, intent, and emotions of a being while not being. Traits inherited from its creator, like a child from their parents. And like a child, you don't truly own it. These games are not the intellectual property of a publisher or a bank or a mouse. They're someone's child, and just because their cradles were left in the snow to die a soft death doesn't mean that memories and love have to die with them as well. I will always respect the people who work to preserve these things for themselves and future generations. Before I go, I want to mention, the other day, a friend of mine was trying to convince me to at least run post-roll ads on my videos, and I was actually considering it until YouTube rolled out a new change to their ads. Now, if you enable them, instead of being able to choose how they appear on your video, they leave it up to the spirits to decide, aka the algorithm. Mark my words, you will never see an ad on this channel. I don't even want to take sponsorships. If you see an ad, the video got claimed and it's not going to me. I want you to use an ad blocker on my channel at the very least. If you want to support me, you can give me engagement by watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Share my stuff with your family, friends, classmates, your mosque. And now you can support me for as little as $1 on my Patreon. Special thanks to my patrons who keep this channel free, because these aren't just my videos, they're yours too.
Here comes the daredevil! Game over!